So a few updates of you guys, my life.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jesse Showalter, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the 10 basic principles that you need to know about responsive web design. Responsive web design is an awesome solution to the multitude of different screen sizes and resolutions that we have to deal with. Responsive and adaptive web design. Responsive web design, your content is going to ebb and flow. It's going to squish and release consistently as the browser or device size changes. Adaptive web design, on the other hand, is just going to adapt at certain sizes. Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on which one you want. The second principle that you need to know about is the flow. Every HTML document, which websites are built on, are made up of a natural flow of the elements on that page. And as screen real estate starts to get smaller, your content starts to take up more vertical space. It's something to keep in mind if you're not used to it. The third principle that you need to know about is relative units of measurement. No longer should you be designing with pixels or millimeters or picas. Who still designs using picas? Take up more vertical space. It's something to keep in mind if you're not used to it. The third principle that you need to know about is relative units of measurement. No longer should you be designing with pixels or millimeters or picas. Who still designs using picas? But we now have the opportunity to use relative units of measurement like percentages and viewport width and viewport height, as well as M and REMs. All of these measurements are relative to the browser size or relative to other elements on the page. Relative units allow you to design responsive layouts so much more easily, so I'm going to put a bunch of information about relative units of measurement down in the description. The fourth basic principle of responsive web design are breakpoints. Breakpoints are predefined areas of measurement that allow you to rearrange your layout dependent on the size of the browser or the device. So if you have a desktop design with a really wide layout and 12 columns and it starts squishing down to tablet or mobile device sizes, you might want to insert a breakpoint that allows you to rearrange that 12-column layout to a 6, 3, or 1-column layout. This is really, really important because it allows you to take control of your layout where things start to get a little funky and squished and no longer make sense. The fifth principle that you need to know about are maximum and minimum values. Sometimes it makes sense for your content to stretch 100% of the browser 100% of the time, but other times it makes less sense and you might want to set a max width so it feels like there's a containing element that it stays in. As the browser starts to stretch, your content never goes past a certain point. This is really important for legible text. You don't want to read measures of text that are 3,000 pixels wide. It's really hard for the eye. And so you want to capture, control, govern, and maintain with minimum and maximum values. Number 6 on our list of basic principles you need to know is containers or nested objects. Sometimes it makes sense to take chunks of your content like a headline, body, copy, and image that are related to each other and insert them inside of a div. You've now nested that content inside another containing element. Now you can control the containing element instead of constantly having to control each individual element. This makes a lot of sense if you look at a layout like a list of blog posts. All of those blog posts are contained most likely in a div or an article, and each of the individual elements inside of them are relative to the parent container. So understanding how to use containers and nested elements is super important. The seventh basic that you need to know about is actually an ongoing debate of either mobile or desktop first. How do you start designing? Do you start designing the full desktop experience, or do you strip it down to that one column simplified mobile first approach? Really, it's an ongoing debate because there's no right or wrong answer.
Hey everyone, this video is the first selector and then not class China like this, and then we can just copy it. That's pretty good. Okay, so button header CTA. In the header, let's find the CTA.
Yo, what's going on guys? Welcome to your third responsive design tutorial, and in this video I just want to introduce you to the viewport. Alright, so what is a viewport? Well, essentially a viewport is the size of the window you're viewing your website on, and on desktops that size easy to see, it's just the size of your browser, right? And that can be the full size of the screen, or you can shrink your browser. The portion of that browser that you're viewing the website is essentially the viewport on your desktop. On mobiles, however, it's not so obvious. For example, a mobile screen could be about 360 pixels in width, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the viewport on the browser that you use on that mobile is going to be 360 pixels in width, even though it seems that way, like the browser takes up the full width of the mobile screen. It's not always the case. Okay, now most mobile browsers by default have a viewport of over 800 pixels, so that static, unresponsive websites that were originally intended for desktop can be viewed in full on mobile devices. Alright, so this has the effect of then kind of squashing the desktop content to fit onto the 360 pixel screen, and then that's why everything seems really small when you're viewing unresponsive websites. Alright, so for example, mobile Safari, that's the browser on iPhone, has a viewport of about 980 pixels in width. So this is the viewport there, right? But the mobile device is only about 320 pixels in width, right? So if we want to view all of the content in this viewport, in this mobile Safari app, then what we have to do, or what the app does, is squash all of that content. It doesn't cut any off, it just squashes it all onto the mobile device so that everything's really small. So in order to get around this, we kind of have to override it using the meta viewport tag. I'm going to talk about that later, but for now I just want to show you an example of this thing in action. Alright guys, so I'm on thenetninja.co.uk, and what I've done is just right click and go to inspect element. I've got up this kind of device view here. This is on Google Chrome Canary if you want to download it and go along with me and do the same thing. You can see at the top I've selected iPhone 5, so this is displaying an iPhone 5 view, and you can see that this is very much like the desktop view. If I just click to this tab, this is a desktop view. I've made it a little smaller, but this is roughly, look, 1252 pixels in width, okay? And we're essentially getting that view on the mobile device. You can see it's pretty much the same, yeah? Not quite, but pretty much. Let's just do this a little bit more. It's around about that view there, where this drops onto two lines. This looks the same as this, right? Except that this is tiny. This is all really small. And if you were viewing this on a mobile, it won't be much good because the links will be too small to click, or the text too small to read. So it's not a great experience on mobile. So that's what it's pretty much done, the mobile by default. It's taken this content right here, so the viewport must be, I don't know, 1100 pixels in width or something like that, and it's taken it and it's squashed it into the dimensions of the mobile phone, which are these dimensions right here at the top. Okay, so that is the default behavior of the viewport on the mobile phone. Now, no matter what responsive CSS I've done, if we don't override that default behavior right here of the phone to give it a smaller viewport, then it's going to look like this. Now, if you can see on this tab, this is what it should look like on mobile. Everything's much bigger, it's laid out differently, you scroll from top to bottom, and it's more accessible for people on mobile. You've got a drop-down navigation as well. And the way we've achieved this is by overriding that default viewport so that it is now the device width. And the way we've done that is by using the meta tag viewport. If I scoot back over to this one, you can see here I've commented that viewport meta tag out, so it's not having an effect. We're not overriding the viewport, so we're still getting a relatively wide viewport, which is squashing everything up onto the mobile device width. However, on this one right here, I've got that viewport uncommented, and what I'm saying is give this content the width of device width. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next lesson, where we start coding up our HTML, but I just wanted to show you an example of this viewport in action. So this is the default viewport for a mobile phone, where it's quite wide and then it's
Viewport units are used to make typography responsive. They are relative to the viewport dimensions of a device, and percentages are relative to the size of the parent container. In this challenge, we're going to make the H2 and the paragraph tags be based on viewport units. So we're going to solve the challenge right now. The H2 is going to have a width of 80 VW, which is going to be 80% of the viewport's width. And now we can set the paragraph tag, and the paragraph tag is going to have a width also, but the width is going to be, let's see, 75 V min. Now let me put the colon here. 75 V min means it's going to be 70% of the viewport's smaller dimension, whether it's height or width. So now we've been able to set the text based on viewport units. View, let's see, 75 pull on here, 70% of the smaller dimension. So now we've been able to set the text based on viewport units.
this video, we're going to dive into the different parts of Flexbox, starting with what Flexbox is and how Flexbox works, and then we're going to dive into the different properties that we can apply to Flexbox in order to lay out and style our elements as we want. So to get this container, since this will be the container that all our Flexbox items will reside inside. Then, inside of this container, we'll add another div, give it a class, and we'll call this one Flexbox item. Then we'll also give it a class of Flexbox item 1, that way we know which item we are referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, you'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here, and that's because I'm in box item 1, that way we know which item we are referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, you'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here, and that's because I've already applied some styles to these Flexbox items so that we can distinguish them and see them. Now let's copy this and add in 2 more Flexbox items and save that, and you'll see that we have now 3 Flexbox items inside of our Flexbox container, but we don't have any styling to actually make this a Flex. What Flexbox is and how Flexbox works, and then we're going to dive into the different properties that we can apply to Flexbox in order to lay out and style our elements as we want. So to get started, let's add a div inside of our body here, and we'll give it a class of Flexbox container, since this will be the container that all our Flexbox items will reside inside. Then, inside of this container, we'll add another div, give it a class, and we'll call this one Flexbox item. Then we'll also give it a class of Flexbox item 1, that way we know which item we are referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, you'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here, and that's because I've already applied some styles to these Flexbox items so that we can distinguish them and see them. Now let's copy this and add in 2 more Flexbox items and save that. And you'll see the filing to actually make this a Flex container. Class of Flex type. Then Flexbox item, and we'll also give it a class of Flexbox item 1. That way we know which item we're referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, you'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here, and that's because I've already applied some styles to these Flexbox items so that we can distinguish them and see them. Now let's copy this and add in 2 more Flexbox items. And save that, and you'll see that we have now 3 Flexbox items inside of our Flexbox. container, but we don't have any styling to actually make this a Flex container. So to get started with creating a Flex container, let's go into our styles here. We have our Flexbox container selector, and save that, and you'll see that we have now 3 Flexbox items. To this container, we'll add another div, give it a class, and we'll call this one Flexbox item. Then we'll also give it a class of Flexbox item 1, that way we know which item we're referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, You'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here, and that's because I've already applied some some styles to these Fluxbox items so that we can distinguish them and see them. Now let's copy this and add in 2 more Fluxbox items and save that, and you'll see that we have now 3 Fluxbox items inside of our Fluxbox container, but we don't have any styling to actually make this a Flux container. So to get started with creating a Flux container, let's go into our styles here. We have our Fluxbox container selector, and we can just say display and set it to Flex, and this is how we create a Fluxbox container. Now if I save that, you'll see that all of our items are now the same height, and they all show up in one row. You'll also notice that if I shrink our browser, you'll see that these items will scale their size to fit within the browser, and as I make it wide enough for them to all fit, you'll just show up on the left side of the screen. And this is really the main thing that Fluxbox has going for it. It allows you to style the flexibility and sizing of different elements in the container from the actual container selector here, this Fluxbox container, without ever having to style the actual Fluxbox items. So inside of the container for Fluxbox, you can do things such as laying out your different elements across the different rows and columns, as well as aligning them inside of that layout. And then the items themselves, you can specify how you want them to flexibly grow inside of the container, or how you want them to shrink inside of the container. To make this easier to see, I've created some background styles here, and if we save this, you'll see that we now have our Fluxbox container, which is this yellow background item, and then our different Fluxbox items with their numbers in the corner as these grayish colored with a border that is a little bit darker gray. This way we can see when we shrink our browser, you can see that these items shrink together, and as we increase it, they'll grow again. Now before we get started with actually laying out and styling our different items, it's easier to see. I've created some background styles here, and if we save this, you'll see that we now have the row on the axis start horizontal manner, very easy inside of Flexbox due to this justify content property. But if we wanted to, for example, lay out things on this cross axis, we would use the align items property, and right now the default for this is stretch, which means our items will stretch to fill the most amount of space vertically that they can. That's why some of our items that were smaller grew to full size. If we wanted to keep the size of our items, we would use flex start, and then all of our items would align themselves at the very top of our Flexbox container based on this cross axis. We could also use center here in order to center them vertically, which is one of the on the outside of our container as well. We could use space around, which puts an even amount of space on all sides of the flex items and not just in between them. This makes laying out items in a horizontal manner very easy inside of Flexbox due to this justify content property. But if we wanted to, for example, lay out things on this cross axis, we would use the align items property, and right now the default for this is stretch, which means our items will stretch to fill the most amount of space vertically that they can. That's why some of our items that were smaller grew to full size. If we wanted to keep the size of our items, we would use flex start, and then all of our items would align themselves at the very top of our Flexbox container based on this cross axis. We could also use center here in order to center them vertically, which is one of the most important things that you can do with Flexbox. Before Flexbox, aligning items vertically inside of a container was nearly impossible, Well, a Flexbox is as easy as one line of CSS, and it'll perfectly align all of your items inside of this container. The last way to align our items inside of our Flexbox container is to use the align content property, and this property is only for using on multi-line Flexbox containers. But as you saw, when we shrink our browser size, these items just shrink to take up the amount of space needed. But if we change our Flexbox here to use the flex wrap property and tell it to wrap, you'll see that now our items will wrap onto different lines instead of shrinking their size, as you can see here. And this align content property tells it how much space to put between the lines. For example, if we use flex start, all of our items will line up at the top of the container, while flex end will line them all up at the bottom of the container. An easy way to see this is if we add a height property to our Flexbox container. So if we put height here and we just make it, let's say, 700 pixels, now you can see that the flex end for our line content has made our Flexbox items all align at the bottom of our container, while flex start will make them align at the start. And this has very similar properties to justify content. For example, we could put space between here, and now we have spacing between our Flexbox item rows. And if we shrink this even further, you'll see that there's now even space between them as well, which is great. But align content is something that I don't really use that often, and really justify content and align items are the properties I use most, since they align your individual rows along the main and cross axis. Now let's revert that height back to be default, get rid of our align content, justify content, align items, and wrap, so we just have a normal Flexbox container here. We'll increase that size a little bit, and we'll also remove these axes since we no longer actually need them. Now if we go back into our stylus here, and let's say say we want a column layout instead, we'll just use our flex direction, change it to column, and now you see that our different Flexbox items show up in a column as opposed to the different row. And if we use justify content and we say center, for example, you'll notice that they don't center horizontally, and that's because they're centering inside of the column vertically. And if we put that height back onto our flex container, let's make it 800 pixels, save that, you'll see that now they're centered vertically, and that's because justify content is using the main axis, which in this case is column as opposed to row. If we used align items, we put center in here and save it, you'll see that now our items are centering horizontally because the cross axis is horizontal inside of a column-based Flexbox container. Now we can revert all that back to normal, so we just have our standard Flexbox container here, and we can start to talk about the different properties we can apply to our different Flexbox items as opposed to the Flexbox container. As I mentioned, the container is really only for laying out spacing between your items as well as the positioning of your items inside of the container. The actual Flexbox item properties are meant to either override those positioning and layout properties or to apply different flexible sizing to these elements. As you can see, by default, when we decrease the size of our browser, our items shrink in size. But if we wanted to prevent that on, let's say, only our first item, we could go in here, use the flex shrink property, and set it to 0 to say we don't want it to shrink at all. And if we save that, you now see our first item does not shrink no matter how small our browser gets, but these other two items shrink together. We could also use the flex grow property if we wanted to tell our items to grow bigger. So if we increase our size here, we have all this extra space. Let's say we wanted our third Flexbox item to fill that space. All we would do is set flex grow to be 1, and now that item takes up all of the extra space no matter what size our browser is. We can also use flex grow on multiple items, so let's say we want our second item to also grow, we can apply it to here, and as we increase our browser size, you'll see that they'll both grow proportionally to one another. So that way this item, the Flexbox item 2, and Flexbox item 3 are the same exact size since they have the same exact flex grow number. If we, for example, change this to be 2 and increase the size of our browser, you now see that our Flexbox item 2 is about twice the size of our Flexbox item 3. You will notice, however, that Flexbox item 2 is not exactly twice the size of Flexbox item 3, as you would think by making flex grow twice as big. But all the flex grow property actually does is take all of the leftover space, so if we remove these flex grows here, you'll see we have all this leftover space, and it divides it between all the different flex grows. So if we have a flex grow of 2 here, and we have a flex grow of 1 on the third item, Flexbox item 2 will get twice the amount of available space that Flexbox item 3 gets. So if we save that, you'll see that this Flexbox item 2 has gained twice of the available space that was left over as Flexbox item 3. And the reason that Flexbox item 2 is not actually twice the size of Flexbox item 3 is because we have a width set on our Flexbox items, so it takes this 200 pixels and then adds the amount of available remaining space onto that 200 pixels. If we wanted to override that, we could use what is called the flex basis property, and this tells our Flexbox where to start growing from. So if we change this to 0, our object will imagine that it is 0 pixels wide when it starts adding additional space to it. And if we did this for both of our items here and saved it, you'll see that now Flexbox item 2 is exactly twice the size of Flexbox item 3 because it started adding additional space onto them in a 2-to-1 proportion, so it added twice as much to Flexbox 2 as it did to Flexbox 3, but they had no starting point at all. They started at 0, which means that Flexbox 2 here is twice the size of Flexbox 3. When they started at 200 pixels, it still added twice as much space to Flexbox 2 as Flexbox 3, but they had a 200 pixel beginning size, so they weren't actually exactly twice the size as the other one. For the most part, flex grow, flex shrink, and the different justify content and align item properties are all you really need in order to create dynamic and complex layouts in either a row or a column-based container. But if you needed to override the cross-axis alignment of a property, you can do that with the align self property, and let's say we wanted our second Flexbox item to be in the center of the container instead of stretching the full height of the container. We can just use that, and now you can see that this align self property overrides our align content of our other containers, and you can see that it aligns in the center here while these other items are aligning stretch And this can be applied to all of our different containers. For example, we could go up to our Flexbox item 1 here and make this one flex end, and you'll see that now this aligns itself at the end of the container instead of stretching, which is the default for our align items applied to our Flexbox container. The very last property that is left to talk about is the order property that can be applied to our Flexbox items. This allows us to change the order of our items inside of our Flexbox container without actually changing our HTML. So for example, if we want our Flexbox item 1 to be our third item, we would change the order to 3. Flexbox item 2, let's say we want to be our first item, so we change the order here to 1, and then we'll change the order of this Flexbox 3 to be an order of 2. And if you save that, you now see that our second item is at the beginning of our container, our third item is the second item in our container, and our first item is the very last item in our container. And this is because we use the order property to rearrange the order visually of our items without changing the order in our actual HTML. This is a property I highly advise not using unless you really need it, because this actually messes up the flow for people using screen readers, since the screen reader will still go in the order of the HTML, which means they'll get Flexbox item 1 first, Flexbox item 2 second, and Flexbox item 3 third, even though the order of display is different than that. This also messes up when you're tabbing through different form items. For example, if this was an input element for a text box, our tab would go to the Flexbox item 1 first, and then Flexbox item 2 second, even though they're displayed in order where it should be 2 first and then 3 second. So that's why I highly advise not using the order property unless you really need to rearrange the orders visually without actually messing with the HTML of the document. And that's really all there is to a Flexbox container. For the most part, you just need to have a container that wraps your different Flex items. You give it a display of Flex to say that you're using a Flexbox container. You then use the justify content properties and the align item properties inside of your container in order to tell it how you want to align these items inside of the container. And then lastly, you can use the different flex shrink, grow, and basis properties in order to lay out your items individually inside of the
So Apple glasses might be the first LiDAR AR specs out there. Apple are pushing more and more on their AR abilities, and the LiDAR might be just one of the key features to make everything just work perfectly. Today, let's do a summary of what the Apple Glasses release date and price is going to be, and what the Apple Glass project will do for us. So let's jump right in. Apple are creating some VR and AR devices. The VR device at the moment is being referred to as Apple VR, but the other device is more to do with AR, and at the moment it is looking likely it's going to be called Apple Glasses. Today I'm going to be more focusing on the AR device known at the moment as Apple Glasses, giving you such details such as the release date, along with what we expect the Apple Glasses price to be and what the Apple Glasses features will also be. Anyway, let's dive in on what we know about the Apple eyeglasses. So Apple Glasses have been talked about a fair bit in the past, and we have had leaks and rumours pop up even going back to 2015, and we've also had some come up in 2017. But it wasn't until around 2019 where Apple were really pushing on AR in all their keynotes and demos, and that's why Apple is likely to bring out an AR eyewear project, and as the rumour mill release more and more early information, it looks like it's coming true very soon. Just take a look at the iPad Pro and the iPhone 12 announcements from last year, for example. Both events talked about the new LiDAR sensor, and you guessed it, the sensor is mainly to help with AR. So a dedicated AR device is definitely incoming. So we just had WWDC 2021, but there was also a small, slim chance that we could be seeing the Apple Glasses at this event, but nothing was shown in the end. However, again, iOS 15 is showing more AR abilities, like Street View AR on your iPhone as you walk around a city, or even the new live text feature, for example, the ability to take a photo or even just do a live view on your camera and then just point it at some words, and then basically you can copy and paste or even translate or even look up what the words mean. And then there's even a new feature called Visual Lookup. Even this is machine learning and the abilities we'd expect to see in the new Apple Glasses. I think you're getting the point here. Even with Apple's latest software features and the introduction of the LiDAR sensor, for example, as I already mentioned in the iPad Pro and the iPhone 12 models, Apple are doing far more in AR space, so Apple Glasses are close. So how close, you may ask? Well, we had a leak from Ming-Chi Kuo saying that the Apple Glasses are looking to be released in the second quarter of 2022. But before you get upset that 2022 is a long way away, it is likely that Apple will preview the device before that time. For Apple to announce the glasses and then release the product, say 3 or even 6 months later, it's not unheard of either. We saw the Mac Pro, the trash can shaped device, announced in June 2013, and it actually came out 5 months later. And then again, the same with the newer Mac Pro. That was announced in June 2019, and it didn't actually come out right to the very end of 2019. Other sources, meanwhile, have said that they're still coming out, but they've been delayed by years, with an AR headset apparently landing in either 2021 or 2022, followed by AR glasses in 2023. As you can see, it's a bit of a mess right now, and there's lots of confusion and debate around when or even if we'll get Apple Glasses. But the latest leak suggests that they might be announced not too long from now. But getting our actual hands on them, that's going to be a different story entirely. So no, it's not the news we wanted exactly here. But let's take a look at the Apple Glasses leaks and rumours, as well as Apple's augmented reality background and why AR specs seem like the next big move for the tech giant. So just quickly guys, this channel recently hit over 200,000 subscribers, and we gave away this MacBook Pro that we have right here. Well, I have some great news, and that is we're going to be giving away another MacBook Pro, and this one's a bit more specced up over this one. This one has 512 gigabytes of storage and also has 16 gigabytes of RAM inside. And I'm going to be giving away this MacBook Pro here to one lucky subscriber when we hit over 230,000 subscribers. then guys, today I have got the brand new iPad 2021 model, or the extra one. And there we go, you've also got PowerPoint as well, so you can install all these different apps on this nice chip. Brilliant, I can resize it and everything, can move it around the document any way I want. Really fast and snappy this is, there's no kind of lag or anything. But yeah, we can, I don't know, let's put like a background shadow on it if I wanted to. And it just did that instantly, no problem. Just keep that closed down then. Voila, there's my picture. So I'm really impressed about trying to get out of it now. There we go. And let's just end it down here. Let's just close the actual slideshow. And yeah, let's move on. So that is PowerPoint. Next of all, let's open up Excel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a new document here. So go to the new button. There we go. Open up really snappy. Let's just pick this budget one here. And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to change some of the values here. Let's just change this value very simply. It's from 2,500 to, I don't know, let's just call it 1,500. And let's just see what that will do. So if I just drag it up here, and if I click out, there we go, the amounts have changed, the pie chart's changed, so that is really amazing. It's nice and snappy and fast. I'm going to change the colours here if I can of this actual chart. Let's change it to this theme here, there we go. I like that colour more than the black and green. The blue and green looks cooler, but Excel looks really good as well. I like all the different sort of elements, all the options here at the top. The ribbon works perfectly snappy and fast, so I'm really impressed with that. So, as you can see so far, this iPad is absolutely amazing. But something else what is truly amazing is to do with this channel. This channel recently got over 230,000 subscribers. So I decided to do a giveaway for when we get over 260,000 subscribers. And that giveaway is for this. It's for a brand new iPad Pro.
Shorthand for these different flex shrink.
Throughout this section, we will be using Flex to style this tweet. So to get ready, we're going to have to add display Flex to a lot of the elements. So let's add it to the header, display Flex. When you're using Flexbox, you have to use display Flex on a lot of different things. So I'm just going to copy this, and we have it on the header, we have it on the profile name, we have it on the follow button, we have it on this H3 and H4, we have it on the footer, and we have it on the stats. So now we have Flexbox everywhere we want to have it. And you can see it's already made some changes to what our page looks like. name. We have it on the follow button. We have it on this H3 and H4.